So, James, with someone with your background in oil and lending and real estate, then you get into strategic metals. How does something like that even happen?
Yeah. Well, like you said, my background is what I knew. When oil prices started dropping, we were at $140 a barrel, and it didn't take long. We were under $50 a barrel. So oil companies slowed down. I no longer had beds being filled in my workforce housing. The construction slowed down. Went more to a service industry in the Bakken as opposed to a development. It'd been almost 10 years since I'd been divorced, and I ended up getting custody of my two daughters. They were still in high school. They were living in Phoenix, and I didn't want to pull them out of school. So, I basically went back to Phoenix and got back into real estate and flipping some houses, remodeling, and slowly built up where I was lending money again. The market was doing well in Phoenix, so the recovery had been there. And in lending private money, I used to get all kinds of weird calls, loan me money on jewelry, loan me money on my car, loan me money, and I never got into those. It just wasn't what I wanted to deal with. Real estate was safe.
Yeah.
So that was had always been kind of my fallback. Until I got a call one day, and nicest guy, he's like, "Hey, I'm in this situation. I own this metal. It's a strategic metal, which I didn't know what that meant at the time. And he told me what it was valued at, and that it was in Switzerland. So I'm hearing kind of cool stuff. Strategic metals, and it's used in, guidance systems and missiles and airplanes and all these super cool things. It's in Switzerland, so I'd never been. And I decided to take a chance, and I was like, I'm going to do my due diligence first. But in my due diligence, I went to Switzerland. I went to this vault that was, like you see in the old Russian movies when the hangars open. That's how these doors were at this facility. This big 30-foot steel door slides open, and there's these boxes, gray boxes, unmarked. And I'm just like, okay, and they open them, and very secure, very official. The Swiss are very official. Then we went to the laboratory outside of Zurich in a town called Lucerne. Met the lab, and the guy who owned the lab, and he explained everything. Showed how the valuations worked, the different markets. He showed me different markets where it was sold. So really, I did my due diligence. I knew I had something, and it was a little overwhelming, because of the value. We were talking about millions of meters of this nickel, and it was valued at 133 euros per meter.
And unbelievable.
Yeah, and it was millions of meters. So, I decided to do it. I took a chance on it, and unfortunately, the group that I lent the money to had some legal issues with their company expiring because it was they'd let it lapse, and now they couldn't get their product back, and my money's tied up in it, and I can either go the legal way and go after it and get it back at a default. But the thing was, I was dealing with an 82-year-old Swiss gentleman and a late 60s, who is now my partner, gentleman, who this was everything they had. They couldn't fight me. They didn't have the money to fight me on it, but it was like, I'm not gonna take, it was way more than what I'd put in. So we worked out a deal, and but in working out that deal, now I was a 50% owner of this asset. What I didn't know, I didn't know what I didn't know is that this asset has to have origin history. Where did it come from? This was in late 2022, early 2023. a lot of nickel wire came out of Russia and Indonesia, different parts of the world, but Russia was one of the big ones. And with sanctions, all of a sudden, anybody I would talk to, that was the first question they were asking, where's it from? Because they couldn't buy it. They couldn't put it in manufacturing because it was sanctioned. Anything going into the Western world, you couldn't do it. So I spent time getting DNA, having the lab, the gentleman I met outside of Zurich, doing the testing, verifying where it was from. Then we had to go through the government in the Czech Republic to get the certifications for it.
And you spent millions of dollars on this process over 3 years.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about why the validating all of this is so important?
Well, if you think about what it's used in, so it's used in medical devices, pacemakers. It's basically a super pure, very fine nickel wire. It's 99.96% pure, and it's about half the size of a human hair. So to give you an idea of, it breaks easily. Mm-hmm. Drawing it or stretching it, making it this size, it has to be precise to the micron.
I can imagine.
If it's off, it can throw off manufacturing. If the purity changes one little bit in 1 millimeter, it can change. And now you're dealing with pacemakers, you're dealing with aerospace, people's lives are on the line. Downstream products that, you have a bad run and you have products going, 100,000, sensors going out, because of this one thing. So it has to be very backed up in every way, validated, tested, even where you store it, how you store it, where it's from, how it's shipped, how you sell it. So, not everybody's buying 100,000 meters or a million meters. So now you're doing 1,000 meters that you got to take off of one spool and put it on another. It has to be perfect. The tension has to be exactly tuned.
Yeah, when most people think about metal, they think about just a big chunk of metal, you cut it up and ship it. But this is such a refined product that you need those laboratory testings. And I can imagine at that level how expensive it must be, and time consuming it must be. And then the regulations and the documents about where it's coming from and where it's stored and where it's going and all of that, the paperwork must be insane for this.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's and it's got to be, everything's got to make sense.
But that's also the reason why it costs so much.
Yeah.
Is because it requires so much of that on the front end.
Yeah. Well, and it's taken me 3 years to get it from point A to the end to Z here, where I can finally sell it. And, we looked at other avenues of trying to sell it in bulk and discount and whatnot. But, we were dealing with governments. We were dealing with super companies, Mitsubishi Materials, offered to buy a big chunk of it. But after a year of working with them and them going back and forth, it was just like, is this ever going to close? So that's when I shifted to, what, I own the asset, it's mine. Why not just sell it myself? So that's where we're going now. So, but you're dealing with vendors getting approved, you're dealing with certifications,
Right.
and that's when I say, then I didn't know what I didn't know. You've got to have a certain certification to sell it to medical device companies, a certain certification to sell it to aerospace companies, because it has to be exact. It has to be.
And you're selling these all around the world, and every country has its own regulations and certification processes. Right? So quite a big operation.
It is. It's still new. I learn new stuff all the time, unfortunately. It's like, oh, but you need this. It's like, oh, okay. So that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years.